321 Central traffic stop.
21.
I'll be on East Green, right outside Henry County, 911 dispatch.
321 status.
I'm Commander Yasser Bashir along with Officer Sohaib Yusuf. Welcome all the wonderful viewers of Aaj TV on this very special episode called The Bridges. And today's topic is going to be very sensitive. The reason being is that the crime we're going to talk about, millions of people all over the world, and especially thousands of people are affected by this crime, which happens at the hands of the people who love and supposed to protect us. And what is that crime? It is family violence, or what commonly known as domestic violence. What we're going to do today is we're going to take a different approach in addressing this issue or this problem of family violence. Is that we're going to briefly go over the history of family violence, what are the cycle of the violence, and what you or your loved one can do to protect yourself from it occurring or stop it from occurring. Before we go into our episode, I have a brief video that I would like you to share with you, and this is from our chief, Houston Police Department Chief Acevedo, and Harris County District Attorney Kim Ogg, and about the how we are collectively working together to address family violence incidents.
Today, I'm really proud to stand with the District Attorney of Harris County, Kim Ogg, to talk about a new policy and a new process to combat the scourge of domestic violence in our city. We know that too many women and families, because it truly is a crime that's committed against families, not just the head of the household, are traumatized by violence in the home. And what we want to do today is tell the people that would commit these type of crimes that enough is enough. Although we're heading in the right direction and we've done a lot of great work, we want to continue to forge ahead. We want to tell the victims of violent crime or sexual assault or any crime that it's never your fault, that we will believe you, that if you call us, you will be taken seriously, and most importantly, that we will get you help. We'll get you help through the criminal justice system, we'll get you help through our victim services section, and we'll get you help through our partners in the community with the Women's Shelter and a lot of other great organizations that we work with. And so it's a great day here in the city of Houston. First, let's just make it real clear. Domestic violence is a problem. It's a problem in this city, it's a problem in society, and it's a problem across our nation. It continues to plague our community, it continues to plague our families, and it continues to plague too many families in the city. In 2018, domestic violent crimes accounted for about 8% of all reported crimes to us here in the Houston Police Department. From 2013 to 2017, we averaged about a 9% increase year over year in domestic violent reported crimes, which is a good thing. We want this crime that we know is one of the most underreported crimes. We want victims to step forward. We want victims to know that they're not alone. We continue to experience this increase. In 2017, last year, as I reported earlier in the year, 43 domestic violence murders occurred in the city of Houston. That's 43 lives that were cut short because of the scourge of domestic violence. And we know that too often domestic violence leads to homicide. It leads to a mother being taken, in some cases a father being taken, leads to someone's life cut short by this violence. Our focus is on the victims, and that is the purpose of HPD's new policy when we respond to domestic violence scene. I've signed the policy this morning. It will be out today. I'm really proud of the fact that we've been talking about it and everybody will be ready. We want to put perpetrators on notice. The Houston Police Department will be putting you in jail if you commit acts of domestic violence. In collaboration with the DA, and despite all the political theater we see out here, Kim Ogg and I work together. We talk on a weekly basis. We go to breakfast on a regular basis. We bring the sheriff with us to breakfast. Sometimes we'll bring the fire chief because he has a lot of time on his hands and not many friends. Sam Pena. So we'll bring him to breakfast, and we talk about how can we make the city of Houston, Harris County safer. When an officer, effective immediately, is on a call involving family violence, the officer shall request. This is not a should, this is not a may, this is not a I'll think about, this is they shall request the presence of an on-duty supervisor to the scene when any of the below applies. 1, the suspect is on scene. 2, a warrantless arrest is not made for an offense related to family violence. And 3, bodily injury, which is defined in section 107, 1.07, subparagraph 8 of the Penal Code as physical pain, illness, or any impairment of physical condition, or a threat of imminent bodily injury, or physical contact regarded as offensive or provocative. A sergeant will be required to respond to the scene. And that's not happening because we don't trust our officers. That's not happening because we don't trust the DA's office. That's happening because we care about families. We care about domestic violence. We care about lives that are being shattered and terrorized by domestic violence. And we want the victims to know that we will leave no stone unturned to ensure that in cases where probable cause exists to make an arrest for domestic violence, that in fact that arrest is being made. Because the one thing we know by having this mindset, we know for a fact that 43 murders won't be 44 because we didn't make that arrest. And so from a supervisory standpoint and a organizational pursuit of excellence standpoint, it will give our sergeants an opportunity to do 2 things. 1, assess their officers' understanding, or several things, their understanding of their officers' understanding of the law as it relates to this type of crime. 2, assess their ability to actually articulate to the DA's office when they call up, describing a scene, the offenses of domestic violence. And 3, it will give them an opportunity to train our officers, provide additional training, make sure that we're developing our officers so they become and are in fact the crime fighters that we pay them to be and the peace officers that we pay them to be.
We are extremely proud to announce a collaboration that I think is unique in criminal justice. Our district attorney's office and police departments work in sync with each other, although we have different jobs. So police officers respond to domestic violence scenes. They are able to see right there on the spot what the evidence is, but they have to contact a district attorney's office intake division where lawyers sit behind desks without the ability to see the victims, without the ability to know what evidence does or doesn't exist. And it requires communication and collaboration. And so filing charges is a 2-part process in Harris County. And in domestic violence, historically, there's been gaps. There's been loopholes where often because somebody at the scene didn't want charges filed, or because officers weren't trained or told what evidence to collect, or because assistant DAs answering the phone at intake didn't ask the right question or didn't get all of the information that they needed, we've seen cases where people have not been arrested for domestic violence in Harris County. The chief brought that up to me when he first came to town in 2017. I appointed Carvana Cloud, head of our domestic violence, family violence, criminal law division at the DA's office, and Jim Leitner to head up our intake division and grand jury division. And between these 2 individuals, they have been the ones responsible for trying to close the loophole, the gaps that happen and allow domestic violence perpetrators to go unaccounted in either court or in society in general. And so we are looking to make criminal justice smarter, because we want to make people safer. So I wanted to tell you what the data has shown us and what we've accomplished in the first year, because it's measurable and it's significant. In 2017, we filed 6,905 domestic violence cases, of which 2,900 were felonies. That's nearly half. The total domestic violence filings were up almost 900 cases in 17 from the previous year, 16. And on a 5-year arc, we are filing more domestic violence cases than we have in the past 5 years. So despite the change in administration in both the police department and the DA's office, we are working together and did the first year. And that's why the fire chief is important too. His people are often first responders to these types of cases. So together we have really been focusing on improving our response. Why? Because so many homicides and aggravated assaults are domestic. So many times the perpetrator is a loved one of the victim. And because we have such conflicting emotions, there's historically been problems with cases where complainants, victims themselves, were too afraid or for other reasons didn't want to pursue charges. So Ms. Cloud and Mr. Leitner have worked with police to come up with a checklist for our intake division so that officers know what to look for on the scene, especially in strangulation cases. And that's where we've seen the biggest difference in filings and where we hope to reap the most benefit in terms of public safety.
Welcome back to our show. All right, Yusuf, how are you doing today?
Doing good.
All right, good. The issue or the problem we're going to talk about today, or the crime called domestic violence, there's so much information and we can address it so many different angles. And I think we are truly going to not be able to provide all the information that is needed, but at least I want the viewers to have a basic understandings. How can you tell if domestic violence is going on? What are the signs, the symptoms, and how to better address it? So today, why don't we just start first by just talking about the history of domestic violence, and where does it all start? Why is it happening?
So, domestic violence has a very long history. It's been around us since the dawn of mankind. Domestic violence is one of those things that has stuck with us, and one of the biggest things that we see is back in the 60s, the 50s, 60s, and the 70s in America in general, domestic violence was considered just some sort of discipline. Police officers would come to a scene where a husband or a wife has struck their spouse, and if the person was not even willing to cooperate, then they would not even do a report, much less charge anybody. So the basic point was that if they didn't have a cooperating witness or a cooperating complainant, they were not going to do any sort of report or charge the person for the assault.
Interesting.
This all changed in about September 1985. This change, and laws provided more power to police officers, because the law recognized that it is such a heinous crime that it was the responsibility of police officers to protect the victim from the aggressor. Because as police officers, the first thing that we do is our job is to preserve life in any way, shape, or form. So when it comes to preservation of life, we should be able to preserve one of the biggest things, which is stop family violence and help those victims. So that protection came along, and that's how the big change in law helps police officers now be able to exercise more authority and help the victims, because sometimes the victims just don't know what to do. That's basically why we're here today, is to make sure that the victims are able to understand.
Great. So here's what used to happen. My understanding is before 1985, here's what happened. The aggressor would abuse the victim, and he or she would secretly call the police, and the police gets there, and he would coerce the victim not to cooperate, or tell the police that she does not want to file charges.
It was considered just discipline.
Discipline, or it was considered, and then when the complainant or the victim does not want to prosecute charges, and their hands were tied. But now the laws have changed. But now,
Absolutely.
in 1985, after that, now we have a responsibility is to protect the victim. If we have probable cause, the victim obviously has bruises, or we determined that she's obviously the victim of a crime. And even if she does not want to prosecute charges, now we can, on behalf of the state, we can.
Absolutely. In the state of Texas, if we have, if an officer comes to a scene and determines that physical assault has taken place, we don't need the victim's cooperation, as we'll go down in it later in the program as to how that can happen.
And this is different from other crimes.
Absolutely. If a person wants to struck another person, it's assault. It's still assault, but it doesn't fall under family violence. Family violence is considered a very dangerous crime. It is so dangerous that CDC, an organization within our country that works with viral outbreaks, medicine, and disease, considers family violence to be an actual public health issue.
Wow.
And it's amazing, because a lot of people didn't know that. Until I joined the police department, I didn't know this. And through study, as modern times progressed and people started understanding the impact that family violence has on a person, And it's not just a simple impact, a physical impact of being struck, but family violence happens in so many different ways.
Right.
It can be physical, it can be mental. And the family violence, as we'll go down, and we'll discuss it further, is it doesn't just affect the spouses. If you have kids,
Let's slow down a little bit. We got a lot of information. I think we're going way too ahead. But let's go back as we talked, as you touched about the law, and you touched about the how widespread this issue is about domestic violence. And the chief in our video already briefly gave you the data for Houston, how often it's occurring. But I want to take it to a different angle. Okay, is this isolated incident just happening in Houston, or this is happening in Canada, or happening in other major cities throughout the U.S.? There's so much research out there about this crime, but the one research I came across, I thought was very interesting, and I want to share with you and the viewers, was that Washington Post did analysis of approximately around more than 4,400 killings in the 47 major cities in the U.S. in the past decade. So they got the data and they did their research, and they found out that 46%, that's a staggering number, 46% of the females that passed away died at the hands of an intimate partner. Intimate means that they're married, or they were boyfriend, girlfriend, or they were very emotionally involved with their partners.
Absolutely.
And that's a staggering number that we want to bring to everybody's attention, how widespread and how big this problem is.
Well, another study that we came across back in the day, well, not even back in the day, very recently, was found out that any house that's associated with domestic violence, a police officer will return to that house someplace between 5 and 9 times.
Wow.
That's an average. 5 and 9 times they'll go back to that house for domestic violence issues.
Wow.
So that shows you how deeply problematic this issue is for society as a whole, because it affects society on so many different levels.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's just how it goes. So let's talk a little bit about the impact now.
Now, yes, let's talk about impact, but here's what I want to do. When we talk about the impact, now, in my mind, okay, there's an aggressor and then there's a victim. Okay, there's just two people involved. Then how can it have an impact on a big, wider society?
Well,
That's something I want to bring it to the viewers' attention.
Yeah.
Let's take it step by step, and we're going to break it down into family, the children, the economics, etc.
Yeah, so the first thing that we'll go through is, let's just take the victim and the aggressor.
Yes.
So you can have a husband and a wife, or a wife and a husband for that matter. There's a very common misconception that only men beat women. It's actually, through our experience, we have seen it to be both men.
ways, yes. But the men is very small percentage in single
Exactly,
digits
yeah.
as compared to the
Compared to the
females.
females, yeah.
It's in double digits, and it tends to be very high.
Exactly. And the first thing that you're doing is you are mentally, psychologically, and physically abusing the victim itself. That's abuse from the aggressor. The aggressor is looking for power, so they will abuse people in that manner. Now, as they're doing that, it trickles down to the rest of your family. So if you have kids at a very young age, when their brain is just a sponge for all the information, it's absorbing all this information at a very fast pace, they are now absorbing this information that it is okay to hit another person. It is okay to hit somebody you love, and that it's perfectly fine, it's perfectly acceptable. And that tends to impact the mother or the father, whoever's being abused, seeing their children going through the same amount of abuse. And then the children will get impacted, and they may skip school. They can end up being very volatile, where other predators may be able to take benefit of them. And then on top of that, sometimes it's even seen that kids will go on and then develop violent tendencies, and they'll start abusing from animals all the way to human beings. So it's a build-up process that happens as we go through.
You know, as we were talking about research, I like to do a lot of catching up on research, because I'm always fascinated of what kind of connection they're able to make. And the one connection I came across was the animal abuse and domestic violence. There's a very strong correlation. And I was astonished, because people who tend to hurt animals, they actually, I guess, they become more hardened, and it's okay for them to hurt another human beings and not have any kind of compassion or mercy or feelings toward that person. And I was like, wow, this is a very good, interesting fact to know. Is if you do see somebody hit an animal or kick a cat or a dog, that's a very good predictor that a person's. I'm not saying everybody who hits animal
Yeah, absolutely.
is a family violence aggressor, but it is a good indicator that what the
Yeah.
stats show us.
Yeah,
and I thought that was
that's
interesting.
through years of studies coming
and, yeah.
from different psychologists that have gone back to look and see at various
Yeah.
abusers, child abusers, domestic violence abusers. They have gone back and looked at their predatory development,
Right.
and they've seen that since a kid is so young that we're teaching them, hey, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay, look, I'm beating.
And the other thing you talked about, I'm just going to expand on it, was the aggressor and the victim, and then how does it impact society is, if you ever go and, I'm just talking about like your city, you're going to see a lot of drugstores.
Yeah.
And who is going in that drugstore to buy medicine? People who are depressed or going through a lot of emotional problems, and there are counselors everywhere. Because many of the victims who go through this emotional train wreck, they're devastated, and sometimes it takes them years to overcome that trauma.
Absolutely.
And then going back to the kids, I want to expand on that as well, is that you mentioned about the kids, how they, you talk about the cycle, how it repeats itself.
Yeah.
But the drug abuse, their grades, emotional behavior, and also they're involved in risky behavior themselves. And something else I learned recently, which was very astonishing, and actually I think it kind of gave me a better understanding, was that some of these gang members, these predators, these criminals who want to enhance their criminal enterprise, that of course they need new fresh recruits. And who are these recruits? The recruits they look for are young children who come from broken families, who have low self-esteem, and what they do is they come in and fill that void of the father figure or that belonging into a certain organization, which could be illegal, it could be not healthy, but this is the kind of people they look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It plays a very important part
Yeah.
because in such an environment, you're always looking for, when you're in an environment where you're constantly just seeing beatings and you're seeing a very harsh growth, a harsh atmosphere, you're going to look for somebody that gives you peace,
Yeah.
somebody that keeps you calm.
Yeah.
It's very easy for such predators to come
Yeah.
in and just play that role.
Just like gang members,
Yeah.
prostitution, human trafficking, etc.
In human trafficking, that plays a very important role that this happens.
The one more thing I want to mention was that domestic violence also has a huge impact. Not as huge, but significant impact on our economy as well, because the victim, they loses their, could end up losing a job because they can't keep a steady job, or they have to call in sick, hospital bills, and they're not able to produce 100% at their
Yeah, because you're missing out time at school, you're missing out time at work, and you're trying to avoid that situation.
So on this note, what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back shortly.
321 Central traffic stop.
21.
I'll be on East Green right outside Henry County. 911 dispatch.
321 status.
321 Central traffic stop.
21.
I'll be on East Green right outside Henry County. 911 dispatch.
321 status.
Welcome back, and we were going to continue our episode on domestic and family violence. Earlier we talked about why it occurs and what kind of impact it has on our economy, but now we're going to take a different angle. Let's look at the behavior involved in family violence.
Absolutely.
What are some of the symptoms, the signs we can look for that we can say, okay, this is starting to, the cycles begin to start. So why don't you explain a little bit more about
In order
that?
for you to understand these terminologies and everything, the first thing that you have to see is the types, the common types of family violence that people that normally go through.
Okay.
Number one is obviously physical.
Right.
Physical is when your spouse, not even just your spouse, but anybody that's in your family strikes you. Okay? They strike you with a hand or anything else. That's your physical violence right there. The second thing is sexual violence. Now, sexual violence is it's a touchy subject because people sometimes don't understand it, but at the same time, it requires, hey, you're trying to force somebody into committing sexual acts that they just don't want, but it's still sexual violence.
Right.
Another important one is stalking. Now, a lot of people don't understand stalking. Okay, they just like if somebody's following you, all of a sudden it's stalking. That's not the case. Stalking is when somebody is not just following you, but actually interfering in your life on a daily basis because they believe that you are somebody that they just have to have.
Right,
Stalking
right.
is a very deep. We can talk about it for days, but that's a very deep thing that we can go to.
And some of the things could be phone calls, following you, coming to your workplace, following
Emails,
you
text
around,
messages.
email, text messages.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then there's another one which now psychologists are looking at is psychological.
Wow.
Psychological plays a very important role because, as we've seen in school, kids get bullied. Psychological is something like that when you have somebody at home that's verbal, that has verbal cues, has verbal words or non-physical actions that they are trying to drive down your self-esteem. So that's when the psychological part kicks in. So you've got these four general types. Now, these are all not all the types, but these are the four most common types that we as police officers come across when something happens. And it's easier to understand the cycle of things that happens when you know, okay, these are the four common types. But of course, we can always add on to them because medicine comes every day. So when it comes to the circle, the first thing that we're looking at is intimidation. Very common thing, right? Yeah. Intimidation is you're at home, you're trying to bully someone. You're trying to bully your husband or your wife. You're destroying property. You are cussing them out, showing them aggressive behavior. You're trying to instill fear in them. The fear that if something were to happen, that they would have some sort of punishment coming their way. That's intimidation.
Yeah.
So,
the other one, intimidation, is like scaring the person. But the one I think is very, very difficult is emotional trauma.
Yeah.
And that could be such as, saying bad words, putting you down, name calling, playing mind games.
Yeah.
That's something that upsets you, intentionally saying those words or doing that act because you know it's going to cause you trauma and it's going to cause you pain, or bring out bad memories from the past because they want to see you in pain. Because why? Because the person wants to feel empowered.
Yeah, absolutely.
That he's somebody special, or she's somebody special.
Then you've got isolation. Isolation is very common. Isolation is the worst one. You've always, I'm sure everybody has at some point heard, I'm not going to talk to you. If something like this happens, I'm not going to talk to you. The silent treatment that we talk about, that's isolation. You're isolating a person from yourself because they want to be with you. You're isolating a person. Sometimes we even have isolation when they tell their husband or their wife, you're not going to go visit your in-laws, or you're not going to go visit your own parents or your brothers or your sister. It's isolation. You're cutting that person off completely from the other world, which gives them comfort.
So these are the different tactics. So far we talked about intimidation, using emotional blackmail, isolating the person from isolating the person from family, friends, because you want that person to be only alone.
Yeah.
And then the other one I'm going to touch upon is using children as blackmail.
Absolutely.
Custody threats. If you leave me, I will take over the kids. You will never see the kids again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Harassing the kids, using the children as messengers, sending messages. Your mom is awful. Your mom did this. Your dad did this.
Absolutely.
Just mentally messing with the children's mind and not creating a healthy environment.
Yeah.
And children, the poor innocent kids, as we talked about earlier in the first part of this episode, is now, even though the children were never hit, but now they're going through the same trauma.
Absolutely.
And this is all being done because of the parents.
Yeah, and then another thing that goes in hand with that is blaming.
Blaming.
While they're isolating the children, they are using blame as a factor. Hey, I'm not going to let you see your kids because you did this, or I'm not going to let you have this because you did this. It's an if and but game, because they'll blame you for their mistakes. A person will blame you for their mistakes, for their shortcomings, for their faults, and make it feel like it's your fault that everything bad is happening within their life. That's a very common thing that we see.
And the last one we're going to talk about is how a person uses this to control, or in domestic violence situation, is of course economics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is obviously not giving you any money. You're maintaining all the financial responsibility in the house.
That's a very common way of trapping. That's what we consider to be trapping. You trap the other person because you want that person to be reliable on you, because then you can control them. In a way, that's just you're taking another person and turning them dependent, almost in a slave-like manner, because you want that person to be completely dependent on you. So if you put the whole circle together, you've got a person that's scared.
Yes.
Right? You got a person that's going through emotional trauma.
Right.
Okay? On top of that, you're telling that person you're not going to give them money. Okay? You're not going to be able to see your kids because
And
you're
plus, you're isolated from
and
all
plus
your
you're
friends and
isolated from
family.
everybody else. So,
family,
so you're just
yeah.
alone. You're
Yeah.
alone in this world, and all of a sudden, and that in itself
Yeah.
is the biggest psychological, mental
Yeah.
way to break somebody's self-esteem down.
And let me give you some of the examples that I came across for isolating. Something so ridiculous, it goes against common sense. Be like, oh, well, that person just looks at me weird and disrespecting me. I can't stand that person. I don't want to see that person. Of course, loving wife or husband want to keep the marriage going, and
Yeah.
then what they do slowly to cut that friend off or start keeping distance.
Absolutely.
Next thing you know, once that's done, then another friend or another family member. Before you know it, there's nobody left.
Exactly, and that's something that I've seen. I have personally seen in a lot of my experiences. I've actually seen all of these. I've actually seen most of these as a combination on a certain person, because it's very heart-wrenching when you come across just one of these. But unfortunate thing about family violence is that the circle usually has about 5 to 6 components on each person, and
Yeah.
it because it's easier to break a person down.
So
that way.
let's start from like a common cycle. Okay, so for example, a husband and wife commonly, this would normally this all occurs. The tension builds up, whatever the tension may be. It could be work, it could be at home. The tension builds up, and now the person start to explode, start having some aggressive feelings. See, now the assault occurs.
Yeah.
Okay, the assault occurs. It takes place. Don't call the police. The police are gonna take me away. You will not get a job, or you cannot support the kids, or your financial. You cannot support the household.
Yeah.
And then he'll start apologizing, which
Yeah.
what we like to call the honeymoon period.
The honeymoon period, exactly.
And that is when now the gifts start coming in. I'm sorry, honey, that I hit you. I didn't mean to. I love you. I care about you. And then the wife feels like, wow, he really cares about me. But
Go
that's
right
all.
back to it.
That's all an act.
Yeah.
And then the next cycle becomes more vicious.
Yeah.
And then it becomes more and more vicious.
And it's
Yeah.
interesting that you bring that
Yeah.
up, because psychologists have believed that family violence cycle, once it starts, it's not going to end. And that's something that you and me as police officers
You
have
know it.
seen on a very common basis. People will go back, because how many times do we get called to
No.
the same house and we go there, it's the same person, even after we have emergency protection orders or protective orders out there in place, they're together. Oh no, he told me or she told me it's going to be different this time. And we've seen it so many times that it's never different.
Yeah.
It only escalates.
Escalates.
It never de-escalates. It always gets higher.
In my career, I only saw one time in a domestic violence incident that the wife had the aggressors clothes outside, or husband's clothes outside.
No, hey. at
Only
least
one time I
that
saw
was
that.
one person with power. It's very
Yeah.
unfortunate, but every time that I've been to it, we've had to explain to people that, hey, once this starts, like they say in Urdu, "Sher ke muh khoon lag gaya," once it starts, it never ends. It's always going to keep building on itself and building on itself, and it's only going to get worse. And we try to get that across to people and say, hey, look, I understand. Sometimes one of the biggest things other than that is money. We tell them, we understand, hey, he's not going to give you money, but you got to help. Let us help you.
Now what I'm going to redirect this is, as a commander, I have been approached many times by different community members. Hey, we have a big issue with domestic violence, and the people are just afraid to report it, and they're scared, and they need some help. So I'm glad we are doing this show to give at least some information, some guidance. But now let's talk about this. How can we break the cycle? Okay, you're involved, the viewer, you or someone you know is or are involved, or are involved in this in a very difficult relationship. What is some things we can do?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing that we can bring upon is, look, report it to the police.
Yeah.
It's very important that you do, because here's something that I'm sure some of the viewers will understand. You or somebody inside your house right now could be a victim of domestic violence, and you may not even know it. Domestic violence is not always flashy like they show in the movies. It's very quiet. And the number one thing that we tell everybody, that I as a police officer tell everybody, is help us help you.
Yeah.
So the first thing that you need to do is you need to seek out help, because we have resources.
But
that
you
we'll
know,
go into.
I'm gonna be straight with you, and in some South Asian communities, it's a taboo to call the police.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And because they feel like once we expose our secrets to the police, it's like the whole community is gonna know, and they're gonna blackmail us. They're gonna, not blackmail, blacklist us. And we're not gonna have no friends.
Yeah.
I mean, we mentioned earlier, the statistics are against you that this cycle only gets worse and worse, and we have.
And that's what we're
Homicides.
trying to do here
Yeah.
is by bringing this program out to the viewers is because we want to break that cycle. This is our attempt to break that cycle by telling you you're not going to get blacklisted, you're not going to get blackballed, nobody's going to stand against you, because at the end of the day, like we said at the beginning, we are here to preserve life.
Right.
And we must, and that's just our job. And it is your own job to preserve life, because you're not just an only victim. If you have kids, your kids are suffering at the same rate that you are. So you need to think about the bigger picture, which is your life is important, your kid's life is important. So if you bring it to our attention, we can help you, we can bring resources, we can do a lot of stuff that can break the cycle. So that's one of the things that we could do is report it, and that would immediately break the cycle.
So one of the things that I'm going to touch upon is, okay, what is some of the ways we can break the cycle? Well, this cycle has to start very early.
Absolutely.
Even if you don't have any family violence issues in your household, but this is something we need to teach our kids and also each other. For example, teach safe and healthy relationship skills. For example, if you do have issues, you communicate, you don't hit, you don't demean each other, or you yell or scream, you talk it over much as possible. Yes, we do have odd bursts, but we have to do it maturely. Engage influential adults and peers groups, educate our school, I guess our children.
That's another thing. We do have to, the thing is, like I said at the beginning, kids have, at a young age, their brain is just developing, they are just soaking in information.
Right.
You want to instill in them from the beginning that this cycle of violence is not something that's acceptable at anything. It's not even just acceptable to society, it's just not acceptable at all.
Right.
You cannot hit another person. And I think that will play a very important role in breaking the cycle, is teaching the next generation that they need to look out for these cues and manipulate them.
And also, we also need to support survivors to increase safety
Absolutely.
and lessons and harms. In addition to that, strengthen economic supports for families. That's another thing. And is there anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah,
how
absolutely.
We can
Like I said, like you added on, helping economics. The one thing that I love about our community is that we always come together.
Yes.
Regardless of color, creed, caste, or anything like that, we always come together, right? And we have so many resources that we have in place. We'll go into that in a few minutes.
Right.
But our community is there to help each other. So that whole stigma about, hey, the community is going to blacklist me, that doesn't exist. The community is here to help you.
So what we're going to do is we're going to take a short break in a minute. And then after our show, what we're going to talk about is the resources that are available to you and what is it as law enforcement, our responsibility to protect you from domestic violence. And we'll be back shortly in a minute.
321 Central traffic stop.
21.
I'll be on East Green right outside Henry County. 911 dispatch.
321 status.
321 Central traffic stop.
21.
I'll be on East Green right outside Henry County. 911 dispatch.
321 status.
Welcome back to another episode of Bridges. So far, we talked about domestic violence, why it occurs, what kind of impact it has on our families and our communities, and also our society. But now we're going to take a different approach, and that approach is going to be what is our responsibility as law enforcement officers when it comes to domestic violence. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something differently. We're going to take you on a journey. What happens when you do pick up the phone and you call 911? What happens from that point on?
Yeah, so first thing, as I've mentioned throughout the program, the job of a law enforcement officer is to preserve life. That's one of our main tasks, if not the main task. And when it comes to family violence, the law has given us the power to do exactly that. So when you pick up the phone and you call us, we're going to have an officer that's going to come out to your house, and the first thing he's going to do is he's going to separate you and whoever was involved in the incident. So if it's a husband or wife, they're going to get separated so that we can interview them separately. We're going to look at your injuries, and we're going to document those injuries through photographs, even draw a chart and make sure that we know exactly where the injuries are, because here's one of the things that people have to understand. When you are injured, the injury marks don't show up immediately. It may take from 3 hours to a day before those marks are fully visible for us to take. So there may be a secondary interview. Another thing we'll do is we'll look at your past history of that location. As I had mentioned earlier, an officer may go someplace from 5 to 9 times back to the same house that's been associated with domestic violence. So we're going to go back and look at those reports and see what's going on with the whole thing. If you have children, we might even talk to them to get an idea of what they saw, because as people may not believe it, but kids sometimes are the best witnesses to a scene, and because they give us an unfiltered account of what actually happened. The next thing we're going to do is, if we find enough probable cause, we'll see if you want to press charges, and if you can't, then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and do it as the state of Texas allows us to do so. We'll do it on the state's behalf if we feel that a danger is so extreme that immediate action needs to be taken. Now, that's not where the call ends. That's just the primary investigation call. There could be a secondary interview, as Houston Police Department has family violence units. They may call you in to take a look at your injuries if they have worsened, because, as I said, that could happen. And then we can go into several things after that, such as protective orders and all this other resources that we have after that as well. But that's the crux of how a call is supposed to take place once you call one of us to your scene and want our help.
Right. So now let's continue on. So now you're on your own, and you're home with the kids. You're the bread. Who's provided financial support for the family. He's gone to the jail. Does that mean it's end of the world?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
So one of the things that we'll do is at the end of the call, we'll give you, at least what the Houston Police Department does, is what we call a blue form. It is a victim services form. On the form itself, we have multiple resources that you can apply. It will have numbers to our family violence units. We'll post those at the end of the program, as well as other resources which will help you keep life flowing if something happens. Another thing on there is going to be our district attorney's office, because in case the violence is so extreme that we need to separate you from your spouse and that you may need to go and get a protective order. So if that is the case and you need a protective order, then either we can help you file it, okay? And if you are not comfortable with us helping you, or if you at that point don't believe like it.
So there's a difference between in Texas. Some of the viewers may not be from Texas or Harris County.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have two different kind of orders. One is MOAB, which is the Magistrate
Order of Emergency
Protection. That's up to 48 hours.
Yeah.
And then we also have protective order, which is long term.
Yeah, it's from 60 days and it can be extended to 90 days. Now, I understand a lot of the viewers here may not be from Texas, so this may vary from state to state. We're going by the Texas standard, which is that it allows us to give you an immediate relief. The MOAP, what we call the Magistrate Order of Emergency Protection, is immediate relief. Okay, that is, hey, it needs to be there. This person has suffered too much. We need to separate them. Now, if you believe that it needs to be extended beyond that, then we can get you a protective order, which will get you 60 days minimum.
No, actually, the protective order actually is good for 2 years.
Well, yeah, we can add it up. We can add it up to 2 years.
years.
Initially, it's 60. It's 60 days, and then extended to 90 days. But it's good for 2 years, and that's one of the things that we do see is that people will actually.
The one thing I love about the protective order is that if you violate it, and there are actually conditions inside the protective order, what the aggressors can or cannot do.
Yeah.
For example, he cannot commit family violence.
Yeah.
He cannot communicate directly with you or threaten you or use a third person party. It could be a family
Absolutely.
member or friend
Yeah.
to communicate with you, show up to your work or your children's school. But there's a list of restrictions that person has.
Yeah.
So if he breaks that, and then he can go back to jail.
Yeah,
again.
in the state of Texas, it's considered a Class B misdemeanor offense. That's what we call it. It's a Class B misdemeanor offense, which is punishable if it's considered a crime. Even though these orders are considered civil in nature, breaking them has a criminal penalty. And if you continue to break them, then it can be enhanced into a felonious matter as well. So it's something that the state of Texas takes very seriously and considers that to be a
So
serious
one
issue.
of the things we do is that whenever we are dispatched to a domestic violence type of incidents, before we leave, we always give what's referred to as a blue form. The blue form has various different resources that are available to the victims, such as counseling, shelters, attorneys, etc. It's a big, long laundry list. But in Houston, we also have a South Asian nonprofit organization that actually they specialize in assisting South Asians, like Indians or Pakistanis, because they speak the language, and they provide counseling, and also they arrange different shelters because of maybe maybe the victims, they're scared.
It happens quite a lot,
yeah.
especially in the Southeast Asian community, that people don't like to reach out to anybody else,
Yes.
or are too shy or
Right.
too intimidated to do that. And communities out here, especially when you see somebody that's from the same culture, from the
Yeah.
same understanding, it's easy to reach out to them and get
Absolutely,
help
yeah.
from them.
Right.
And you feel that belonging, that attachment,
Yes.
and it makes it easier.
Yeah.
And that's something that you need when you're dealing with something like this.
And one of the issues that, because I also keep contact, I have a relationship with nonprofit organization, these South Asians, because they want to build a relationship. What are the issues that are occurring? Now, some of the issues that come up, and which I'm going to explain to the viewer, is that when the person does decide to leave, for one thing, they were not prepared, and the aggressor took some items which actually causes them more problem. For example, what I would like to do is, what I'm going to do is talk about a safety plan.
Okay.
When you know, hey, it's time for me to move on, I need some help. Here's some of the things that the victims can do to protect themselves and get ready for that transition. Okay. One thing is always keep some money on you.
Oh, yeah,
Save some
absolutely.
money.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's probably the biggest problem is money. How am I going to get for groceries, or how am I going to get transportation? Sometimes the victims, I mean, they're left on the street with nothing.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're just no clothes, nowhere to go. The other thing is make sure that you also maintain your ID, identification, important documents.
Your passport, your birth certificate,
Certificates.
your social security card.
If you have kids, the number one thing you remember you need to keep is your insurance cards. Make sure you keep that or keep copies, because that's one of the things that the aggressor used to intimidate is they keep important documents.
Yeah, the passport is actually a very common
Yeah.
thing that we see out
I
here.
see
But
it
how
all the
many
time,
times
yeah.
we've gone out there and
Yeah.
they've said, "Hey, I can't leave. I want to go back to Pakistan or India or Bangladesh,
took
but
my
I can't
passport."
because they took my passport." So that's one of the biggest things that we see out here. We see
We also recommend that you have important phone numbers, like your friends, your colleagues, your family members. We also keep a small extra bag of clothes. Okay.
It's like what we call in the military a bug out kit. You need to have something prepared. A bug out kit is basically all your essentials locked up in a bag, and it's something that you may need to leave. And that's basically a way of what we're trying to do here is trying to explain to you that in case you have to leave and you decide, you make the brave step, because it is a brave step. It takes a lot of courage to be able to say, I don't want to be with this person anymore,
Right.
because your relationship starts with love. Every relationship starts with
Right,
some sort
right.
of love and affection. Now you want to leave. The safety plan, this is what we call a safety plan. The safety plan is very important because we want to make sure that you are fully prepared should you come to that brave step. You don't want to be on the road without important documents, without money, because you will get left behind. And a lot of times victims give up on it and go right
Yeah.
back because they don't know what to do.
What to do,
They're
that's
not
right.
prepared. So it's easier for them to go back, even though they understand that they're going to get abused again. They'd rather take that abuse than take that step.
Okay. First of all, I disagree. You do not deserve to be abused.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
because all these females who are victimized, they're our sisters, our mothers, and as law enforcement officers, it's our duty to protect them.
Nobody deserves to be hit, no matter who you are, what color, creed, caste, or economic status you have. Nobody deserves to be hit.
So what I'm going to do now is, okay, the Houston Police Department, okay, we have our own unit that specializes in family violence, domestic violence cases.
Absolutely.
And their sole job is to investigate domestic violence, and plus they have specialized counselors with them to provide counseling to the victims. And we also have 4 different locations throughout the city.
Yes.
We have one office in the main headquarters, and then we have 4 satellites all over the city to
At the
make it
main
more
command
convenient
stations,
for the victims. But what I do love about our family violence is that they have a threefold approach in addressing domestic violence. Okay, one is we need to be trained as officers. That's continuously, we constantly are trained how to identify
Absolutely.
family violence incidents and how to investigate those incidents and how to provide different type of resources.
Absolutely.
The second is our family violence they do is they educate the public. Because this is not a crime you can keep under the rug. It needs to be exposed because, as we mentioned earlier, the kind of impact it's having on our families and also our society as a whole.
Yeah.
It has a huge impact, and also the loss of lives
Yeah,
at the hand of
absolutely.
loved ones.
Yeah.
Some places it's more than 40%.
Yeah, 46%.
Not in Houston, but I mean, like overall, some areas.
Okay.
But we do have some people who are even in Houston who die at the hands of the people
Of
we
family
love,
violence, yeah.
and that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
The third thing is the family violence. They investigate domestic abuse crimes, and because they want to make sure they got everything covered.
Yeah.
And if there are any loopholes, we work closely with the district attorney office and also our other partners to make sure that we have all the resources we need.
Now, you mentioned the district attorney office. Actually, the Houston Police Department now has changed their process so much
Yeah.
that in terms of strangulation is basically choking somebody with your hands or some foreign object. The Houston Police Department now has, and the district attorney's office actually requires this for us to file what we call a strangulation form. Strangulation form is actual account. It has a body diagram on it, and you mark where you see the injuries. That's how severe it is that we actually have a form in place for this. And I believe that this practice has now been adopted throughout many police departments because they want to have a visual of an actual document right then and there and saying, hey, these are the injuries that an officer saw. And that is actually part of the investigation now. So that's another thing that family violence has added to their arsenal to make sure that they can combat this.
So I'm glad you brought that because choking is not the same as strangulation.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because choking in law enforcement for us, that means
Yeah.
if you get some food, it's stuck in your throat.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's choking, not with your hands. This is strangulation.
This is strangulation, yeah.
This is very serious now, strangulation, because recently we have our in-service class.
Yeah.
And I was astonished how quickly the person can pass out.
30 seconds to 60 seconds of loss of brain can cause
Yes.
permanent injury to death at that
Yes,
point.
within a few seconds, the person is knocked out cold. You probably even know.
It's an actual move that's used during fighting, and
Yeah.
people are doing it to their loved ones now. We
Yeah.
see a lot of cases of strangulation, actually an escalation in cases out here, and that's something that's pretty scary, and we have to look at it.
And what I would urge the viewers is if you know anybody or if you were the victim of somebody strangulating you, this is extremely serious. Get out, get some help, because the next time, if that happens, you may not be able to
Yeah,
survive
absolutely.
it.
As we've said from the beginning of the program,
Yeah.
it is something that needs to be stopped, but help us help you. Come to us, let us know this is going on, especially if it's strangulation, because once this starts, it's not going to end, it's going to keep happening.
So here's what I want to do. Okay, we have just a few minutes left. So what I want to do is just do a good ending about our domestic violence, this episode we did, so we can get the message across. So why don't you go first, and then I'll
Yeah,
finish
so like I've said throughout the program, we are here to preserve life, and we want to help everybody that's out there. And in order for us to do that, we need you to let us know that you need help. The Houston Police Department is committed to making sure that family violence is eliminated from the community, and we're going to need the community's help. We're going to need your help. So if you know anybody who is going through abuse, or you yourself are going through it, reach out to us. We'll post our numbers at the bottom. Let us know. We will help you to the best of our ability. We're always here for you.
Well, thank you. Well said. What I would like to say is, first, thank you so much for watching this episode. There's so much information that we wanted to cover, and I believe we cannot cover it within in this episode. But nonetheless, please be careful. I'm sure that all of us know somebody who's involved in a risky, abusive relationship. Get the right resources. There's a ton of information online, as well as in your local police department. There are plenty of resources. There are shelters. They provide you with place to stay and also get you back on your feet. The one thing that we don't want to see is another life lost due to domestic violence. And I'm here available if you ever need anything. Please reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to serve you. And this concludes our episode of The Bridges.
321 Central traffic stop.
21.
I'll be on East Green, right outside Henry County, 911 dispatch.
321 status.